Welcome to our study about the definition and applications of epidemiology. In this lesson, we'll be looking at both the definition and how we apply that to the population and individual level, and then also the different applications and how those apply on the population and individual level. So first of all, let's start by talking about the word epidemiology. If you break that down, essentially epidemiology is the study of epidemics. And epidemics can be further broken down into epi and demos, which is upon the people. So in other words, we're studying epidemics, or we're studying things that are upon the people. We're studying things that affect people. So epidemiology is really just studying things that affect people. So I'm going to get rid of a little bit of what we added here so I have more room later. And so here we have epidemiology, kind of our definition. And here are the two pieces of the definition that come from Merriam-Webster. And they are a branch of medical science that deals with the incidence, distribution, and control of disease in a population, and the sum of the factors controlling the presence or absence of a disease or pathogen. And here I want to do kind of like an implied in an individual. So we have on the population level and on the individual level. So really, epidemiology, we can study these people. We can study things that affect people, both on populations and individual. Now, these are not nice, neat, controlled categories. There are a lot of things that we look at on the individual level that sort of spill over to population and vice versa. It's not necessarily these two separate categories that are hard and fast rules. But in general, it can be helpful to think about this sort of population level epidemiology and this individual level epidemiology so that we don't forget that there are a variety of different ways to think about this. So if we were to then look at some of the applications, these applications are basically descriptive and analytic. And if you remember our previous conversation about the difference between descriptive and analytic epidemiology, descriptive is really designed to describe, whereas analytic is starting to look at relationships and causation. And so we can do a lot of these things that I'm going to be writing here, both as descriptive epidemiology and as analytic epidemiology. So on the population level, we are typically epidemiology aims to study disease over time. And so you'll see a lot of that where we're either looking back in time and studying how has it decreased or increased in a specific population, or how do we project that it may increase or decrease in the future. So we're looking at populations when we're looking at disease over time. We may want to characterize the health of a community. And so we're looking really on the community level or the population level at how could we describe this community? Do they have certain risk factors? Do they have certain incidence and prevalence of disease? And so that kind of thing on a community level. And then we also want to study the working of health services. And so health services are things that we make available to populations. And of course, individuals engage with the health services, but a lot of times we want to know how are we doing our quality and all of that on a population, kind of like on a group level. Now, when we start thinking about on the individual level, that's where we're thinking more about individual risks. We may be wanting to identify syndromes. And so an example of that would be Reye's syndrome, where we discovered that babies who were given aspirin developed certain symptoms. And so we're trying to find relationships between things on the individual level. We may also look at the natural history of disease. And I'm abbreviating here, history of disease, in terms of what happens when somebody gets sick. Do they have, how long do those symptoms last? When does it go away? When do they become infectious? When do they stop being infectious? What percent of people have certain outcomes? And so we really want to look at what happens to individuals as they work their way through that disease. And then we're also searching for causes. And in descriptive statistics, we're really trying to set up the hypotheses that we're thinking about causation. In analytic, we're then testing those hypotheses to see if those are indeed causes of that particular disease. So these are just some of the applications, kind of the big picture of what those are. And so let me see if, oops, I guess I can't move that exactly the way I thought I could. Well, I can shrink it though, and I can move it over. Maybe move this. So one of the things that I'd like to add to this picture that I didn't exactly leave room for is I would like to talk a little bit about prevention. And prevention, let me change colors back to black, can happen on a primary prevention level, a secondary prevention level, and a tertiary prevention level. And so this prevention that we do, we try to break it down into manageable chunks. And these are not perfect categories. Again, there is sometimes some confusion about, how exactly do we define those and how do different diseases fit into that particular pattern, primary, secondary, tertiary, and it's not always as clear as you'd like. But in general, we like to think, and primary, secondary, and tertiary can happen both on the population level and on the individual level, so I'm going to draw those in kind of both places, primary, secondary, and tertiary. In primary prevention, what we have is healthy individuals. So those healthy individuals are not sick yet. They do not even have subclinical disease. In other words, they don't have disease that's lurking and just has not caused symptoms yet. They are healthy, they do not have disease, and we want people to be here. We want people to be in kind of like the healthy end of the spectrum. We'll call this health. So we want to keep moving people in this direction over here. And in order to keep them healthy, the two kinds of things that we can do are health promotion and specific protection. And so by health promotion, what we mean is that we are sending people towards the healthiness and end of the spectrum. And things on the individual level that fit in that category are things like teaching people about eating right, teaching people how to exercise and fit healthy stress reduction into their life. Those kinds of interventions have a very widespread effect. They are not aimed at preventing just one thing. They might have an impact on cancer and heart disease and stroke and dementia and a lot of different things that may harm a person. So health promotion type things generally move people in that direction, and they may be beneficial for a lot of different reasons. Specific protection, on the other hand, is kind of like this blockade. It prevents somebody from moving in the direction towards having disease. So the perfect example of specific protection is immunizations. If we give an immunization for a particular disease generally, it is protecting specifically for that one disease. Now there are some exceptions to that where we might have protection for more than one thing. But specific protection really helps the body, if it is exposed to some kind of a risk factor, to protect against that thing. So both of these things, health promotion and specific protection, fall into this primary prevention category. So if this is the group that's healthy, then over here, secondary and tertiary prevention, these people have disease. But the secondary prevention, people who would benefit from secondary prevention do not have symptoms. And so that disease is lurking, but it hasn't made them feel sick yet. They don't have the pain, or they don't have the runny nose, or whatever it is that goes along with that particular disease. They are asymptomatic. And the standard thing that we think about with secondary prevention is screening. And screening basically is we want to find people early so that we can give them a treatment that we know is effective. And it really needs to have both of those parts. If we can screen people early, but we don't have anything we can do about it, then that really is not going to help us with secondary prevention. Prevention means that we are helping somebody to move again in kind of this direction over here. So screening is sort of the poster child of secondary prevention. For tertiary prevention, these people have symptoms. Maybe they already have angina, so they have heart pain, which is a precursor to having a heart attack. Maybe they have transient ischemic attacks, which are sort of a precursor to having a stroke. They're short in duration. They cause pain or symptoms. And so a person knows that something is going on. And what we want to do is we want to prevent them from continuing to move towards getting more and more and more disabled. And so if we can stop that, we can prevent them from maybe having a major heart attack and being very disabled or die. Then that falls into the realm of tertiary prevention. When somebody becomes symptomatic, then we want to keep them from getting worse. And so if we can keep them from getting worse, or even help to move them in the health direction, then those are the kinds of things that we want to do. So a lot of treatments fall into tertiary prevention. This can help people who already know that they're sick, but we still want to help them move in that direction of health. So I'll make a big giant arrow over here. We're always wanting to move people towards this end of the spectrum. Now, all of those kinds of things that we do can also happen on the population level. And a lot of times we forget about those. But here with individual, we have the U.S. Guide to Clinical Preventive Services. In the population level, we have the Community Guide. And you've heard about both of those in some of your reading earlier on in this quarter. So the Community Guide really is to look at preventive things that we can do on a population level, interventions that we can make it easier to walk, make it easier to buy fresh fruits and vegetables, make it easier for people to do things that are on the health level. And so as you're going through this process of thinking about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention, make sure that you think both about the individual level and on the population level or the community level. And so that really concludes my short talk on the definition and application of epidemiology. I hope that was helpful for you as you are studying.